Well, good day, friends, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. And today we continue the discussion that we started this past week when we looked at the recovery plan, the economic recovery plan of South Africa, as unveiled by the president, who explained it or expanded on it to Parliament yesterday. And Dr. Pali Lehohla is the former Statistician-General of South Africa and has been in the job for more than 12 years. And he has been very much part of South Africa's planning in terms of socio-economic development in the country. And he's got views on how best we can take the country forward, having seen how government operates and having been part of that machinery. And he will be sharing with me his own thoughts. I'll also be talking to, or will be joined by, Mr. Khandani Msibi, an outspoken businessman and investor, and they are growing his company. He's in different parts of the company and feels very strongly about the rate of transformation in South Africa. And we will be having him as part of our panel in a moment. Phumlani Majozi, senior fellow with Africa Liberty, who's got other views of how best to grow the economy. He believes that government should step aside and allow private sector to run things. And he believes that it's a wrong way, the main thinking in South Africa on how to get the economy going. But then the main thing, given that the plan is out there and has been published, is how this plan is going to be funded. As John Steenhuisen, of the leader of the DA, said recently, he said that what the president is presenting to the country is a mere wish list of what he thinks should happen, because everything that the president is talking about needs to be funded. And the question is, where's the money going to come from? And what we've heard from Treasury is that South Africa has got no money. It's under collecting taxes, and the taxpayers' numbers are shrinking and businesses are shutting down. And South Africa is borrowing more. 21% of total budget goes towards servicing the country's debt. How do we manage ourselves out of the situation we find ourselves in? Unemployment numbers extremely high, probably the highest of any democratic country in the world. So that in itself, I would argue, poses a threat to the sustainability of the democracy, let alone the fact that the livelihoods of people are affected. We just saw a statistic coming from Statistics South Africa recently that says that 600,000 formal jobs were lost in 3 months of this year. And that people lost incomes of up to 88 billion rand, 82 billion rands with that. So we can talk, we can do this, we can do that, but at the end of the day, we've got to get going. Dr. Pali Lehohla, good morning, welcome. Mr. Khandani Msibi, good morning, welcome. Phumlani Majozi, welcome, gentlemen. And I appreciate that you've agreed and you've accepted the invitation. And may I call it the challenge as well. Khandani Msibi, thank you for joining us. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tim, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. I can hear you. Now, I start right away with the Statistician General. He's actually the one who provoked this topic in me and provoked that we set up this panel to discuss how the country should be run, because it's one thing to talk, it's another to implement, and it's another to fund. Dr. Lehohla, you've been part of that system. You've made inputs into how South Africa plans its development, but you've made observations over the years. The Minister of Finance says there's no money. You are saying there is money, it can be funded, these ideas that the president has shared with us. What is the best approach, you think, to make sure that South Africa works again? Dr. Lehohla, go first.
Thank you very much, Dr. Modise. I think that we must understand that a government is not like a household. Right now, I don't have money and I cannot function. But a government can actually produce resources to deploy in an environment where there is no money and create that money. Banks do not use only our savings to lend others. They actually have a letter that they write to many others and provide loans to those. So in a situation as we are in South Africa, a development challenge, we need a lot more government-led processes, but it must be a government that has integrity, that has the capacity and all those things. Without that, We cannot get out of this mess. So it is not, I mean, the Marshall Plan was driven not through money that was saved. It was driven by debt financing, which governments actually do all the time. But when you raise that debt, just as a household or as a business person who raises the debt, direct the resources to productive sectors. Don't raise the debt and then you give it to the Guptas or to go and buy PPEs from China. Manufacture the PPEs here. The problem that we have is that we are so disjointed, even in the process of planning, that whatever is on the table doesn't build the confidence that those things will be done. And it's because of the conduct of the government, how it has behaved. So the question of no money, yes, it might be that, yes, there's not enough tax, but the bank has a responsibility to assist development. In fact, by their own recommendation, the Presidential Economic Advisory Panel says the 10% stimulus, 10% as a percentage of the GDP was too little. Actually, the government has to raise about 15% stimulus as a percentage of GDP. And we know that we do not have that money, but debt financing is part and parcel of the responsibility of a responsible government to invest in things that are productive assets. And that's what has to be done.
Okay. We are saying what we're saying now because maybe it is in an odd sort of way, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, that everybody is waking up to the fact that we are in serious economic trouble. But there's nothing new there. We've been in this economic trouble for some time. Now, what you are calling for, Dr. Lehohla, is something that cannot be done within few weeks, that suddenly you have a responsible government, that suddenly everybody gets it, and suddenly the system will distribute the resources accordingly, and suddenly there'll be an overnight change of mindset. Yet we are on a burning platform. So what do we do? Or we just hope for the best and hope that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, somehow we'll see the light and things will change?
No, not. I mean, we've argued this point when the Treasury produced this report in August last year, that there are things that should be done that are not consistent with what is in that report. Because that report already was saying they will grow the economy at 2.3%. I mean, growing an economy at 2.3% when you had already 27% unemployment will never raise jobs. So that so-called plan by Treasury last year was already a hopeless document, which actually we critiqued. It had nothing to do with poverty and inequality. It actually didn't understand or seek to understand the nature of the problem that South Africa had. Now we have another one, which is just 3.7 percentage points above the 2.3%. It's equally hopeless, but it is even challenged more by the COVID-19. So these instruments should have been done all along. We have had 26 years of experimenting, and we know that each time the Treasury projects revenue, they underperform on that revenue. They underperform on the targets they have. And it's because of the orientation that they have adopted. And that orientation has to change. And perhaps under the circumstances of COVID, it is much more glaring as more people participate in the discourse of policy in South Africa.
We have had more than 26 years of experimenting, as you say, Dr. Pali Lehohla. Khandani Msibi, you are very outspoken. You've been speaking out on so many things that you see as weaknesses in how the economy is managed. I want to start first by asking you to comment on the ideas put forward by the president, the economic recovery plan that is going to guide how government intervenes or directs the way the economy is run to get it growing again and creating employment again. What is your view of what's been put on the table?
Hi, Tim. Good afternoon to you and the listeners and the panelists. Dr. Pali Lehohla, I'm a fan. I feel like a young boy being put into the team with Ronaldo, whom he worships. Tim and Phumlani, good to have you. Tim, the president does not write economic plans. The president presents economic plans that has been put together by the people that work for him. Sadly, you see a lot of national treasury, which is the same things that are in the president's plan. We've had the same speech over and over again. I think national treasury is keeping this country static with the same speech, different presidents delivering it. It's going nowhere. There's my observation that there are 5 things that are missing in that presentation, and there's also 2 ironies that I've observed. Right, the first thing is that there's no reference to previous plans. This is not the first plan we have. We've had plans before. So if COVID meets you whilst implementing your plan, you readjust towards continuing with the plan. Right? But it's almost like we now have a new plan. There's no real reference even to the National Development Plan, which I don't know why they're having the logo of the NDP in all their arguments, because it's actually sufficient proof that they don't even refer to the NDP. Because when you have a plan, crisis happens, you guide yourself back to the plan. Secondly, there's no reference to energy cost, right? If you are saying in your plan you want to reindustrialize, and you're having the smelters shutting down, you've had the likes of ArcelorMittal in trouble because your energy has become too expensive. You have a problem. You are not going to industrialize with expensive energy, right? And also that they can fix Eskom in 2 years. I don't think that is a realistic expectation in terms of energy availability. There's also no reference to beneficiation. I mean, we are a mineral-rich country. Right? I don't understand how we think we can do better by giving our people our minerals in their raw form. Why are these minerals more important to others and not important to us? The fourth one is the regulators. South Africa has regulators who have stifled this country for years. I mean, Regulation 28 of the FSCA and the Prudential Authority, it actually encourages more of our retirement funds money to go out of the country as opposed to be invested in the real economy. And it also prefers investment in the listed stock. You have the JSE that is not reflecting what's happening in the country, but you lose 2 million jobs, and the JSE has maintained its level of performance. So there's a disjuncture there, right? And there's no reference to what industries are we as a country trying to champion, right? I mean, you look at Japan, there's been electronics and automotive. You look at Germany, it's engineering. You look at China, they started with textiles and get into electronics. You look at how the US is dominating social media platforms, right? We have a random plan of entrepreneurs, right? of plans for entrepreneurs, which do not have an anchor in what exactly are we going to be doing. Then you have this overemphasis on infrastructure expenditure. Infrastructure for what, Jim? Because infrastructure must be paid for by the productive activity that will emanate out of what infrastructure is supporting. We don't have that. And then there's 2 ironies, right? The first irony, which comes out of the speech and also out of COVID, is that, and this is a point that Dr. Pali has been making earlier about money, that where did the 500 billion rands that was put out for COVID relief come from? When all along, the Reserve Bank and National Treasury have been telling us that there's no money, right? It's almost like these ladies and gentlemen who are running these institutions, right, will only make money available when the country is dying, but they will never make money available for the country to develop. Why haven't we spent money in the past 3 years, in the past 5 years? Why wasn't there a package for South African industrialization?
Let me interrupt you there for a moment and bring in Phumlani. I know your views, and also invite our attendees to share their thoughts or pose questions if they so wish. Please do so on the chat box, and then I will be putting these to my panelists, Khandani Msibi, Pali Lehohla, Phumlani Majozi, and we will engage further on your points of view. But Phumlani, you are of the view that we need smaller government and that government should get out of the way, and then we'll get somewhere. I find it interesting that it's the regulators, it's the policy makers, it's the lawmakers who believe and say that they are the ones who've got better ideas of how to fix the economy. And not much is being said about those who are willing to go out there, innovate and take risk. What is your view regarding the recovery plan that's been put forward? And how does South Africa manage itself out of this current situation?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thanks, Dr. Lehohla, Baba Msibi. Great to see you all as well. Firstly, let me get this out of the way, Tim. What I like about the recovery plan, I like the fact that there will be the opening of the energy sector, right? That will see independent power producers being brought in that will help with making sure that we can get more power. I also like the release of the solid broadband spectrum as well. So I like those things. I also like the stance on corruption as well. So those things for me are sort of the key fundamental things that I liked about the recovery plan. So I thought, let me get that out of the way, as quick as possible, so I can focus on the things that I don't think will move South Africa forward, given the state of the country. Firstly, when you look at the recovery plan itself, it comes out as a plan that advances more government spending, right? We're going to see 100 billion rands on creation of jobs. We're going to see a huge spend on infrastructure as well. So for me, we have seen over the past decade alone, when you look at government spending, I think we've accumulated more government spending, like even when you compare with emerging markets. The way South Africa has spent, the way South Africa has borrowed over the past 10 years alone, government spending has shot up significantly. And guess what? Unemployment has risen during that period. And then there was COVID-19 that came. We saw unemployment, as you mentioned, Tim, earlier. The second quarter, we saw 2.2 million jobs being lost, right? And remember, this was just during COVID-19. Even before then, the country was in a recession. In March, by the time we hit March this year, the country was in a recession. Unemployment had risen, right, to plus 30%. So over that period, over the past decade, as we saw government spending increasing and increasing and increasing, government debt rising as well, unemployment shot up, right? So for me, I don't think those things, more government spending is the right way to sort of get South Africa out of the economic mess it's in. I think we have to tackle things like labor reforms, which are quite controversial with labor unions, right? You have to look at things like opening up the market. Deregulation is very important. So that you open up the market, you open for competition, you get people to go back to work. Business growth should be key in advancing this economy going forward. You have to see things like cutting of taxes. I think that's very fundamental. Taxes have been rising for some time in South Africa.
Well, let's interact when we get to that point. But Dr. Lehohla, a quick point. What I mean is, if you want to come in, please feel free to do so at any particular time, and I'll just make sure that we're not rowdy as we engage. But then we're talking about planning. Do we have the right people doing the planning in the first instance? And this picks back to National Development Plan and other plans. They've been there. We don't know where they are. They've been changed. They've been thrown away. Number two, do we have the capacity to actually deliver on some of the things that government talks about? And number three, do we have the right culture, right, given the high levels of corruption within the public sector? So it's a case of, do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right capacity? And do we have the right culture, at least within the public sector, to do all the things that we wish we could see happen in South Africa? And on top of that, Khandani Msibi, I would like you to take this point, the fourth one, that 26 years down the line, we have not seen substantial growth of Black entrepreneurs or productive people come into the economy to contribute, because it's not just a case of having millions and millions of social grant recipients being majority or bulk of the Black community, but when it comes to producing or contributing productively, then you have Blacks as a minority. I'm certain a majority of people in the Black community actually want to be the players, the main players who contribute, right? Not just receive benefits from government, but who contribute to the success and sustainability of the country. You go first, Dr. Lehohla.
Well, I think let me argue that we have a regulatory approach to planning or to development instead of a developmental approach. So we have piles and piles of regulations that actually account for very little. Whereas if we had a very clear developmental orientation, some of the points that Msibi has raised about why should we take F and take it, load it onto ships out of the country. If we had a developmental approach to this, we would know that beneficiation is key. But because there are a few people who are holding the purse, who are ready to say, well, if it goes, I'll get my money quickly. There's too much short-termism in the country. And therefore, we have a serious problem around long-term planning. We have a toy for the nation every 2 years. If you count the number of things that are called plans, they count up to now 10 or 12. And it's that thing every 2 years, a toy for the nation every 2 years. There's Christmas for us. And now it's no better now under COVID. That plan is hopeless. The point that Phumlani makes, that there are a few things that are fighting corruption. In the first place, did we need corruption? I mean, you cannot praise a fish for swimming. These things should not have been there in the first place, but they are there now. And I don't think they mean a lot in terms of tackling them, because they should have been tackled right away. They are not going to move the needle the way we want them to move it, because they are things that intrinsically were toxic in the environment. And if we had a plan, we would have plugged those and know that they don't have space in our culture. Nonetheless, having said that, they're okay. You ask the question whether we have the right people to plan. If we had, then we wouldn't have a toy for the nation every 2.5 years. We wouldn't have an amalgam of things that everybody says the president added the is that I wrote in the speech. Because when you look at the speech, it's an amalgam of ideas written by several people which doesn't actually grow together. If you take the 3% growth, which was modeled by Treasury, then suddenly there is a 2 percentage point growth that is supposed to come from trade, and another 1.2 percentage growth that is about if we were to supply the South Africa market with goods that we provided, you would add 1.2 percentage points. If this was part of the discussion and part of the strategy, those 3.2 percentage points should have added to the 3% that Treasury modeled. The question is, why didn't it go in there? The third point, to show that a private sector decided to come with a plan, Business for South Africa, said, here are our targets, 5% growth, 15% unemployment from 30% in COVID. That's what they said. Debt to GDP ratio reduced to 60% rather, and inequality to 0.43%. That's the Gini coefficient. Why has government not been able to come up with those kinds of targets, in particular Treasury, on matters of unemployment and so on? But those things that business said they could do, those targets that business said they could achieve, are not reflected in the speech of the president. The question is, what happened?
Sure, and I'm with you. You know, for me personally, one of the things that saddens me is that, one of the things that troubles me whenever we talk about these things is that there's what I would call an attitude that says, because we've spoken about something, therefore it's going to happen. I think there's that general tendency in South Africa that the best way to deal with something is to talk about it and then pretend that because you've spoken about it, therefore it has happened. And we know that results only come from doing, not from talking about it. Talking is just exchange of views, but it's the actual doing. Khandani Msibi, here we are, numbers of those who receive social grants or benefits from government increasing, but the number of those who want to contribute to the productive forces, to the growth of the economy, are still marginalized. One would have thought that, South Africa is so open, or has been so opened up, that as we speak, there are many, many, many more people who are saying, guys, stop being negative, man. We are busy here making things happen, and you are talking about things not happening. Where are we missing the point in getting more industrialists, entrepreneurs into the economy?
In the first point that I want to respond to is Phumlani on Eskom and the state participation in the economy before I respond to your issues. Phumlani talks about private sector investing in energy. There's no such a thing, because Eskom, to deliver energy from a power station to a consumer, you need a transmission and you need distribution. The private sector cannot build transmission and distribution, right? And therefore, the cost of Eskom of delivering energy factors in all of those services from a generation up to the consumer's door or the industrial's door. And there is no private sector that can compete with Eskom. That is why they want to break Eskom apart. In other words, they want to first weaken Eskom so that the private sector can have a role to play. But even after they have done that, they'll still come with much higher energy cost. So the energy strategy that says a monopoly is bad, it's wrong. When you have a monopoly, you fix a monopoly. But what we have done, we've gone out and fetched a man.
Can I come in? Can I come in there? I'm sorry to. I think the point you are making is so correct. There is an additional point that that institution called Eskom is a complex engineering and economic structure, and to break it up, you weaken it. You weaken its DNA, and if you weaken its DNA, it will not function. And it's being weakened. Its DNA is being weakened so that an accountant can look at the flows of money when its DNA is engineering and economic and not accounting. You cannot break an institution to try and look at how it accounts when it's DNA, engineering and economics.
Sure. Absolutely. Continue.
So to make the ideas of Phumlani work, they brought a man who had destroyed NUMPAC to come and run Eskom. Right? Now, Andre de Ruyter is a nice guy. I know him personally, but he is not the man to run Eskom. He doesn't have the track record that says this is the man that should be running Eskom. Eskom is South Africa's economy. If you take Eskom out, you don't have an economy team. You have nothing in as far as this country is concerned. You have no mining, you have no manufacturing when you don't have Eskom. Eskom is key, and it is key producing low-cost energy. But they're adding cost to Eskom. It's buying coal expensively, it's buying renewables expensively, it will buy more IPPs expensively, and we're never going to create the kind of economy that reflects the opportunities we have in this country. But to answer your question, there's a second irony that I wanted to bring to your attention in as far as the COVID relief is concerned, is that they bought 500 billion rands to rescue the economy as a result of a virus. Black people have had to endure colonization, slavery, and apartheid, which disseminated us for over 500 years. And this government has not put together a rescue package for us. And somehow we're expected to come up and blossom in this economy. But having said that, we have a lot of young people who are aspirant entrepreneurs. But money is difficult for entrepreneurs in this country. It is extremely difficult. And the state itself, because it doesn't have a proper industrial policy, right? And the proper industrial policy it is systemic, from your energy cost, your energy availability to the raw material policies. So if you are increasing your energy cost, and you are exporting your raw materials, but you want to industrialize. You are confusing yourself and us. You're actually lying to us because your actions are not reflecting what you speak. So for black business, which has been kept out of the economy for many years, the barriers remain high. What are the barriers? The barriers are one, access to funding. Now, Tim, look, the South African economy is run by white people, but white people are divided into what are racial tribes, right? You have the Jews, who have a significant stake in the economy. You have Afrikaners, and you have the Greeks. But all of these people have had banks. The Jews started an invested bank in order to fund young Jewish entrepreneurs, budding Jewish entrepreneurs. The Afrikaners, they've had ABSA. The Greeks, they've had their own bank as well, the Bank of Mercantile. A bank is crucial to a people, right, for their development, so that I can be able to call the CEO of a bank and get funding for a project, because banks don't invest in projects. They invest in people, Tim. You could go with the same project to a bank that a white person will go with to a bank. Based on relationships, he'll get funding and he'll get rejected. And the institutions like the ITC, which are supposed to support entrepreneurship, don't do it. Try to go to the ITC with the Greenfields project. They're going to be asking you, Tim, for 30% equity, which you don't have. You're a black man, you want to run, you have an idea of 100 million rands, a billion rands a project. They want 30% from you. They won't find you. Where's the ITC that built ISCO? Where's the ITC that built Sasol? How come we haven't had any new industries built over the past 26 years? We're talking cities. We're talking Mooikloof. Vanderbilt Park was built on ISCO, right? Secunda was built on Sasol. Richards Bay was built on the BHP Billiton smelter. You cannot have the development that doesn't have funding for entrepreneurs.
And we are here today. Majority of young people without jobs, and obviously without hope, and obviously without any meaningful participation in the democratic system. Because it's one thing to participate in voting, it's another not to sit at the dinner table of economic benefit and economic participation. Phumlani, 26 years, and we seem like we are stuck, still talking about problems, and we should be talking more about competitiveness now, saying everything is working, but how do we compete? I don't think we're even thinking about that at this time, when other nations have moved forward substantially. What can young people do from your interactions with them, you think, and your own views? Where is the place for young people in this recovery that we're talking about? And what kind of recovery do you think would work for them?
Well, the place is not good, Tim. When you look at the people who are unemployed in this country, and Pali Lehohla will confirm this, the people who are unemployed, the majority of them, it's young people, right, who really cannot find jobs out there. Some of them have given up looking for work, and they're just sitting at home. And then there was all that happened this year, which made things quite worse. So, I mean, the state for young people isn't that good from a labor kind of point of view. But, you know, one of the things that we need to get right, and that we hardly talk about in South Africa, and I've read about this a few times, and that is the labor costs, right? When you look at the labor costs in South Africa, and you compare it to many of the emerging markets, even in Africa in general, South Africa has very high labor costs, right? And that alone should have and does have an impact on the competitiveness of our country, right? And also, you know, creating an environment where young people can find jobs, right? But another thing we need to think about is we need entrepreneurs.
The minimum wage is 3,500. How much should it be, Phumlani?
Sorry, what did you say, Khandani?
The minimum wage is 3,500. How much should it be?
Well, I cannot sit here and determine as to what wage should an employer pay or what agreement should exist between an employer and an employee. I don't think anyone of
but
us here.
you just said that the South Africa's wages are too high. Yeah? And I'm saying to you, it is 3,500. Yeah? And as a minimum wage. I mean, if other people who are paid higher, they're paid higher for different reasons. I think the difficulty that we have, Phumlani, is that in South Africa, you can have a CEO earn 100 million rands and have a worker earn 20,000 rands, and both of them working in the same company. And analysts like you will see the worker as earning more money, and will not talk about the CEOs. South Africa CEOs are earning American packages, and they expect in the same country that the workers will earn less than Chinese wages. The reality here is that people are living from hand to mouth, right? And they live from hand to mouth because the private sector has mismanaged this country. You'd want to say that the state is in your opening statement. You wanted to say that the state is involved too much in the economy. I'm telling you now that over the past 26 years, the private sector has been retrenching, and the state has been employing, and also the state has been giving out social grants. If the state did not do that, we would have had a revolution, because the private sector is not playing ball.
All right, let me interrupt you there, gentlemen, so I can go to our attendees. They've been posting suggestions and questions. John Kransdorff says, who is going to run the project? So far, all state-run organizations have been a disaster unless the private sector is empowered and given confidence. It is not going to work without a massive effort to get Eskom right. It just is not going to work, and I think the point has been made and responded to. Edward Mboweni says, does the ruling party understand all these plans that are developed by the government? It looks like the governing party and the people they deploy in government run parallel policies, hence the confusion. And Hank says, well, wanted to know about the guests. Dr. Pali Lehohla, Khandani Msibi, and Phumlani Majozi are the guests, are my guests. And is there some hope in the civil society movements where South Africans seem to be recognizing that they can and should have a voice to demand reform so that inclusive institutions and an inclusive state can be built? Because civil society seems to be sitting on the sidelines and waiting for somebody to make things happen for them. That was Andrew Pringle. Tim Modise says, unemployment is partly the result of technological changes, displacement of unskilled labor by robotics, and globalization that opened us up to international competition. Charles Adams says, business and government should try and work closer together. NEDLEC seems to be hamstrung by the unions. Is it not time for an economic CODESA to be held where all players are represented and together a blueprint is created on growing the economy? And Alex says, to say that the private sector cannot provide electricity because of transmission is disingenuous. That's like saying that the private sector cannot be involved in retail because you need roads to get to the shop, and the private sector cannot build roads. Government's role is to provide network over which goods and services can be delivered by the private sector. And Mike Sham talks about telephone data and postal networks that are now run by private providers. Electricity should follow. Now, my sense, given the 26 years, Dr. Lehohla, that you spoke about of experimentation, is that even down the line, even at this point, we don't mind bickering in South Africa and arguing about who is right and who is wrong, instead of just being practical and saying, we have a problem, let's do 1, 2, 3 so that we can solve the problem. In other words, political thinking and who gets to win the debate at the end of the day seems to be what preoccupies us than what works. What makes it difficult to just do what works? Finish and clear, and we just do it, and we say we go by the statistics that you mentioned and say we will know it's working when we reduce unemployment rates by this number, when we reduce dependency on social grants. And I don't think people go out of their way to receive social grants. They want their dignity. They want to participate meaningfully. I don't think there's any young person who would spend years at a tertiary institution obtaining a relevant qualification and education only to sit at home and do nothing. and not get an opportunity, or an entrepreneur, potential entrepreneur who goes out there, wants to realize their vision, but do not get the support? When are we just going to do it once?
I wish I could know, but if you don't have a proper plan, a well thought through, because when you do those things, they must be sustainable. You take the Afrikaners during after the First World War. These guys were poor, dead poor. They thought about things that had to be done. ESCOM was already established. Mining was already established, and farming was already established. And they, using a discriminatory practice, said the Afrikaner will have to achieve the following things. And they made sure those things were on a roadmap, on a plan, and were implemented. We don't have that roadmap. I mean, we need to spend time thinking through whether our orientation up to now of neoliberal economics works. It doesn't. Even the neoliberals have abandoned this thing. Yet we swear by it. And we say that we should show to them so that they can come and invest. Now, nobody's investing anywhere. We really have to get an orientation that provides for South Africa to do things differently. And that orientation requires that the bank and Treasury play an active role in ensuring that the system works. There are major things that have to be led by the state, like ESCOM, and its recapitalization still has to be led by the state because it's a major investment for us. So if we do those things, then the private sector can come and play its role. But if we don't resolve those, extension of credit is very, very crucial. Right now, the credit level has dropped from 15% where it was to 7%. And yet we want to say we are promoting SMMEs. And that is a direct intervention, a macroeconomic intervention by the bank.
Well, you know, the question that I should ask differently is, the decisions have got to be taken for these things to happen. Why are these decisions not being taken? Because there are people in positions of power and authority and responsibility who should just decide that this is what's going to happen and monitor and make sure it happens. Simple. Or that's what I think it should be. I think it's simple, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe there's somewhere, some place where people are told, you can't think this way, you can't decide this.
There's no policy. There's no policy agreement. And for as long as there's no policy agreement and is this tenuous link throughout, we are not going to get anywhere. Because until we've got that policy agreement, and I think that policy agreement should be developmental orientation rather than regulatory orientation, given the circumstances that South Africa finds itself in.
Khandani, okay, Phumlani, go ahead, yeah?
Can I make a point, Tim? Lesetja Kganyago, I think he's very interesting in the sense that what he has said over the past, months, weeks, is that the main thing that South Africa needs are structural reforms and then monetary policy, right? You can reduce the rates to wherever and try to dish out as much money as you can, but if you don't have structural reforms that involve reforming of things like SOEs, that involves things like reforming things like the labor market that I spoke about. If you don't have those controversial things that have to be done, you are not going to, including education as well. When you look at education, there has to be some serious fixes there so that we have a long-term benefit as a country. And Lesetja says that if we don't address the structural reforms that have to take place, you can dish out as much money as you want, but you are not going to achieve much. And I think I agree with you.
The other question, and Khandani Msibi,
I'm sure a lot of black entrepreneurs would love the day money is dished out to them. Because I mean, money has not been dished out to entrepreneurs. We struggle for money.
Here's my question. There are many problems in South Africa of an economic kind. The one that we talk about mostly is unemployment. And of course, the poor economic growth. There's also the fact that we've got a migratory labor system that has had an impact on family lives and community life in South Africa. And we talk about how the economy must be changed, and we say in the South African context, but we don't really say much about what happens within the provinces or municipalities. When we talk the South African economy, we're talking what? 40% thereabouts being concentrated in Gauteng, about 25% in the Western Cape, and the rest in the 7 other provinces. And I've never really heard anyone hold the provincial governments to account to create opportunities for people to work in those particular provinces. In other words, distribution of economic opportunity, for lack of a word. Why is that? We don't think that the other provinces should come to the party anyway, in terms of the domestic economy, to create opportunities for entrepreneurs and opportunities for those seeking employment, because it forces people to move, to migrate all over the place, either Western Cape or to Gauteng, if you come from the Eastern Cape as an example. But it never is put as an issue to say governments must come to the party at that level.
Yes.
Who wants to go?
Tim,
why doesn't it count?
The first thing that
Hey, you want me to?
the first perception that I want to correct is that the Western Cape is not the second biggest economy in this country. It is Gauteng and then KZN. It's just that Western Cape talks more than Gauteng than KZN talks in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to believe these things. But the national plans and the national economy is in provinces. If you look at the plan does not identify any specific province and the advantages we have in those provinces. We don't know what we should be doing in the different provinces, because we have to work with the competitive advantage of a province. What should we be doing in Limpopo with its climate? Right? There's no plan that talks to that. What should KZN be doing? What should the Eastern Cape be doing? I think South Africa is a country that is misadvised, right? And you can see that from one that the governor says don't print money, but he did print money for COVID. Why hasn't he printed money last year, 2 years ago? And I have characterized the Reserve Bank as that ambulance that arrives after the funeral. Right? It actually does not help. When you are sick, you call for an ambulance or paramedic. They must arrive before it is too late. Right? So that 500 billion rands, I'm still saying, should have been released 3-5 years ago and get the economy going. The reason why China has recovered quickly is because they were busy implementing a plan that works. They were growing at that time. And we have a problem because we were not implementing a plan that works. I mean, Dr. Pali has mentioned that we've had 10 different plans. Right? And these plans, all of them, don't talk to a specific program. Should we be mining gold in the Free State, or should we be turning it into a pure agricultural province? I don't know. And that's where when a country has plans, you become very clear about the advantages in each and every province, and you focus on that. Now, one of the things that's going to happen now is that with the closure of coal mines, we're going to destroy Mpumalanga. Is there a plan that says we're going to shut down coal mines, power stations, destroy the economy from Mpumalanga, and replace it with why? There isn't a plan, because the powers that be are driven by vested interests. The most powerful lobby group in the world today is the renewable energy lobby group. It's extremely powerful because that technology has not matured for it to actually be taking on countries' economies. If you are a mineral-rich country like ours, trying to beneficiate your minerals using solar and energy is really pleading for failure in your strategy. We need to be focusing on a much more reliable and stable energy sources in order to get industrialization.
Let's pause right there. Mashao Rasabuta says some of the malls host retail houses, Pick and Pay and the like, and they then display spaza shops and change the makeup of business in the communities where they are built. Beg your pardon. Yeah. And Alex says, employers do not pay the minimum wage because of the stranglehold that unions have on the labor space. There are very few CEOs in South Africa, but many are overpaid, including government employees. The state over-involvement is the reason the private sector is crowded out of the economy. Those are Alex's views, and I will be going back to some of the views. Now, Phumlani, we are here. Two questions. One, what are the immediate things that you think should be done in South Africa to stimulate that recovery and the growth and create the opportunities? Two, how, even though it's too late, we cannot influence that. What is it that you think the budget next week can do or should be adjusted to do in order to realize the recovery that the president spoke about?
Well, the budget certainly, in my view, can't further push, sort of promote more government spending, because already right now we can see our position where we are right now. I hear Khandani is sort of, supporting this idea that it's fine, we can continue sort of government spending. But when you look at what government debt has done in other countries, at the moment it's very, very high. It can have huge negative implications. So the budget needs to ensure that there has to be some sort of a cutback, right, in spending. We've seen the finance minister in the, I think it was February this year, saying that he wants to cut 160 billion rand over the next 3 or 4 years. Right. Now, there's a huge pushback on that, especially because that is from the public sector wage bill, and the unions have pushed back on that. So there's politics involved in place that government needs to sort of fight through. So for me, I think there has to be cuts in spending, because spending is really hurting us right now. At the same time as well, we need to be honest that we cannot continue raising taxes further and further, right? So we don't have that luxury in the country. We can't. The moment we raise taxes, again, we are weakening our economic growth, of which, to reduce the current levels of unemployment we have, we would need to reach plus minus 4%, right? In fact, closer to 5% to reduce the current high levels of unemployment. Right now, we are not growing at all, and you need rapid economic growth to allow for that. I think there would also need to be some huge reforms when it comes to the regulatory environment, right? There has to be the release of the spectrum, which I mentioned earlier. I think we need to see concrete sort of commitments from the finance minister. And also the main important thing, of which I totally I disagree with fellow panelists when they say that we can leave, especially Khandani, when he says that, we can leave Eskom as it is. My view is that there has to be, Eskom can, I'm not saying that we can privatize whatever, but allow for competition, at least, to come
all right.
So we are able to provide more energy to the people.
Okay, well, the immediate things, because we're going to talk again, I can promise you. And that disappoints me, that in a year's time, we'll be talking more or less like this, and I wish we didn't. And I hope that I'm wrong. The immediate things that you think can be done, Dr. Lehohla, that can show that we mean business this time. South Africa is on demand. Where do you see the opportunities? And how can the budget be adjusted to realize the objectives of the economic recovery plan?
Well, there are a few things that certainly can be done. One is the involvement of the Treasury and the Reserve Bank in ensuring that the macroeconomic is tampered with. For too long, that macroeconomic fundamental that we said is fundamental has not been fundamental, or has not been in place, because you cannot have a macroeconomic that is in place when we have 30% unemployment. It's wrong. So we have to actually temper that in order that the Reserve Bank and the National Treasury play a role, a developmental role in the state. Two, we got to look at education. In fact, all the things around reforms, I think everybody agrees to those. There's no point about not releasing spectra. Wage bill, well, you don't constrain the wage bill. You make the people that are there to work, not to say constrain the wage bill. It's almost keeping them there and saying, I'll underpay you because you are not performing, instead of saying, I'll exact performance. So the orientation is wrong. You've got to get the right people in the right place and do what is necessary. Those are the things that have to be done. So the economic policy orientation is quite wrong. It will not take us anywhere. It has to be developmental. And by developmental, it means those things that the state can take risks around, it must lead and take the risks on those and not shy away from that responsibility.
Khandani Msibi, the immediate
that's
things. I mean, you are in business yourself. Do you see any opportunities which, within, let's say, 6 months, can show that things are beginning to turn around? And number two, any opportunities to reprioritize the budget? And if you could, in which way would you do so?
Tim, I think maybe the first thing is that I would like you maybe in the future to have a debate on on ESCOM, just ESCOM, right? Because there's a lot of misconception about ESCOM and competition. It's statements that have been loosely thrown around. I think the Minister of Finance is holding the purse of the country, him and the Reserve Bank governor. The country is in a crisis. Right? If he doesn't increase the spending, we will not have a country. So there has to be spending, and again, it's one of the things that we need to understand that there has been 500 billion rands that all along we're told does not exist, which means that they must go to the same place and ensure that there's a spending.
That was
I think the state now needs to prioritize industrialization and entrepreneurs. The president mentioned that there's 2.9 to 3.5 million small businesses, right? Now, and that number is in his speech, right? Now, if there is 2 million small businesses, entrepreneurs, right? Tim, if they employ 5 people each, there's a potential for 10 million jobs. Right? So we need to think about that and say that how can we drive entrepreneurship? Because this whole thing of rescuing an economy that was not growing anyway, you're going to get the same results, right? We need to build a new cake, and the new cake has to be built with young people who have demonstrated in many areas. I mean, I work with a number of young people that have gone out without government support to start creating jobs for themselves and their friends. And we need to make money, funding much more available to these young people so that they can continue to look after themselves.
Yeah, well, this is where we are now. And we are talking, and we hope that through these engagements, somehow we can move the needle a little bit. As I said, I am not so optimistic, and I wish I could be, that this time next year, we will be talking, reviewing what happened the past year, and that things indeed did improve. I hope and pray that we get to that point. But let me thank you for having been part of the panel and these conversations. Phumlani Majozi, thank you very much. Khandani Msibi, I appreciate your presence. And Dr Pali Lehohla, thanks again for sharing your thoughts with me this afternoon. And to our attendees and their questions and opinions, thank you once again. This is how we come to the end of our webinar on the economic recovery plan and how it should be funded. Let's connect again next Thursday. Otherwise, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to colleagues.